Hello there.
Good afternoon, Mr. Alex. This is Rajesh from Indus.
Hi, Rajesh.
Thank you for giving me the time. I'm fine, thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you for the time. In the past, when the infection was at its peak in US and UK, flights were never banned. As per the Wikipedia report just 2 hours ago, US has more infected cases than India. Why ban of flights from India?
Yeah, thanks, Rajesh. And this is the subject of some misunderstandings. So for the first time, our health officials have rated a country, India, as a high-risk country. And they take a lot of things into account. The state of the pandemic, new strains of the virus, the health system, how it's going in India and other countries, and a lot of other logistical and other factors. So what the government did was announce a temporary pause on flights while we could reset our quarantine arrangements. We have a lot of flights from India. We had 8 repatriation flights scheduled for May to come back from India. And what we found in our hotel quarantine and in Howard Springs was an increase from 10% of cases positive from India to about 60% positive from India, in an increase in numbers that meant that the system was in danger of being medically unstable here versus the rest of the world. So acting on that health advice, we put the ban in place. We've never assessed a country versus another country through the pandemic. We don't look at it that way. The health advice we receive is about what the risk is from any particular country at that point in time relative to all of those things I've spoken about. The health system, what is going on, the number of cases, whether they have high or low vaccination rates in recent times. But remember, this has changed many, many times, our understanding of the virus over the last year. Our understanding of the vaccinations, whether they'll be effective, and of course the understanding of what travel arrangements and quarantine works. So it's evolved. It's a very difficult decision, I'm aware, and I know people feel very strongly about it, but it's a temporary decision is something I want to reiterate.
Australian citizens stuck in India are banned from entering, failing, fine and jail term. The chief medical officer says he did not recommend fine and jail term. So who did?
Yeah, so this is again a bit of a misunderstanding. So we amended the Biosecurity Act in March last year to bring in strong penalties. So the penalties you're talking about were actually brought into place by the government over a year ago. They apply to everybody who breaches the Biosecurity Act. So they could have been used any time in the last 12 months if anybody breached the Biosecurity Act in an egregious way. That was to make sure that if people did deliberately bring COVID to Australia in a way that caused an outbreak, they could be prosecuted. They've never been used, those jail powers. And the Prime Minister's made clear here, we don't expect to use them again. But they're important deterrents in all situations, including India, but all other places as well, for people to do the right thing. And sometimes people deliberately choose to do the wrong thing in any situation. So the advice, of course, from the health officials was clear that India was a high-risk situation and that we should do a temporary pause on flights so that while we reset our quarantine, while we put in place 2 negative tests. There has to be 2 separate negative tests, which is new before someone gets on a plane. That means working with airlines and third-party ports. It means working with different countries. It means working with India to reset quarantine and logistic arrangements. So the temporary pause on flights, it's not a ban on Australian citizens in India returning permanently. It's a temporary pause, and the government intends to resume flights and repatriations as soon as possible.
The health system in India is stretched because of sheer numbers. Most of the standard Australian citizens may not get the treatment. Have you had a thought on that?
Rajesh, you're absolutely right. It's a terrifying situation. We understand that. Our hearts go out to everybody in India. India did so well in the first wave to get this under control. They got their cases under control. They got their deaths under control. But just like 100 years ago, we're finding the second or third or fourth waves are more deadly, more serious. This is what happened 100 years ago in the last pandemic. And now we're all stunned at the incredible loss of life every day and the number of cases. We're very aware people are in danger. They've been in danger all around the world now throughout the course of the pandemic, and we've had to make some very difficult decisions. This is a difficult decision to take 2 weeks to get this right. But nobody who wants to return from India, who's an Australian citizen, wants to infect a plane of people, They don't want to bring a wave to Australia. They want to make sure that they're safe, but also they're safe for their family and friends, and it's safe back home. So we have to get that right. While it's tough, it's also necessary, and that's the advice we've received. We're expanding our Howard Springs facility by 1,000 to make sure that we can take direct charter flights from India to Howard Springs with increased capacity, in a safe way, with 2 negative tests, and provide protection for Australia, but also for the people on the plane.
This question is from Surinder Jain, Hindu Council of Australia. Is the government willing to make a 10th hospital on the lawns of Australian Embassy in India and treat stranded Australians?
Yeah, no, thanks, Surinder. I obviously deal with the Hindu Council a lot as a minister. We've looked at all sorts of options. At the moment, as Surinder and I think all of us know, the strain on the Indian system is immense, and it's going to be that way for some time. So what's important from Australia's perspective is we do everything to support India at the moment. That's why we're sending millions of masks, PPE, thousands of ventilators, oxygen producing devices. I know the Hindu Council and others have been invited to many events. We're going to raise money for charities that do things already on the ground. But what we don't want to do is add strain on the system. And we certainly, some people have suggested we could establish our own clinics to vaccinate people in India. We don't believe that would be possible or right to set up, inside the Indian system where people are literally dying, only Australian clinics, which would only treat Australians. I think everyone understands how difficult that would be, and that might not be morally the right thing to do either. What we can do is repatriate people where they want to leave. But people are in immensely complex situations. Some people are in India because they're caring for sick relatives. They can't leave. They might want to, but they can't. We have to work with everybody, and that's the offer we make to everybody here that's listening through the Hindu Council. We need to get good lists of who's over there, what their needs are, how quickly they want to leave. This is more complex than people imagine. People have family ties, business ties, life ties. We have to work through the vulnerable cohorts, how to get them out quickly. But a lot of people, the reality is, as you know, Rajesh, they're going to stay and they're going to face danger because their families are there. And we understand that too.
I fully agree. There are many people who are taking care of their old parents. I know I have friends who have gone there. They know the danger, but they will not come back. The second question is from, this is again from the same organization, Ashwini Jain. Is it possible to have a leak-proof quarantine, or it is beyond the capacity of Australia?
Sorry, what was the word I missed? What type of quarantine?
Leak-proof. So that's
a leak-proof quarantine. Is it likely we'll have a leak? Is that the question, do you think? Or?
Yeah.
Look, it's possible. And the advice was, with so many cases increasing, with a new strain, we had to take some time to reset the arrangements and make sure that they're safe. And look, medically, with different mutations of a virus, there's not much time in India at the moment to study this current mutation and the ones that are ravaging through India because they're in the middle of a crisis. They can't take the time to scientifically study it while hospitals are stretched to breaking point. So there's risk, and so we have to assess the risk carefully. We've announced a big expansion of Howard Springs. We are looking at restarting repatriation flights as soon as possible, as soon as practicable. But we want to make sure they're very, very safe. Australia, we are lucky that we are so far away from the rest of the world. But if we had anything happen like the US or like the UK or like India, we would be subject to the same rates of death and challenge that any other country is. So we have to be very careful about that. And as the Prime Minister said, if we just had the average number of cases in the OECD, that so far in the pandemic, we would have had 30,000 people would be dead right now. So all of us take that seriously. And I know we're all thinking about how can we repatriate vulnerable people, but how can we also keep protecting the Australian community?
Last two questions from the community. One is from UIA, Raj Natarajan. Has the minister considered whether the government is exposed to a legal challenge under international human rights law by preventing its citizens from entering country?
Yeah, thanks, Raj. Look, the government gets advice from all our agencies regularly. We get advice from health, we get advice from legal, attorney generals, we get advice from Border Force. The Biosecurity Act has been in place a long time and the amendments have been in place over a year. We're confident about our arrangements, but really I'd say to the community and I'd say to everybody, this temporary pause is very necessary to protect Australia, but also to protect people that will be travelling. We need to work together on this and partner together. The government's intention is to resume repatriation flights as soon as possible. We all know how difficult and dangerous this pandemic is. We're all dismayed at the loss of life in India. It's tragic and it's going to continue for some time. So whatever we can do as Australians to support India through this time, while we've got it good here, we will keep doing that. You can absolutely be assured there'll be more support coming from Australia for India as it goes through this horrible crisis. And I think we've got to focus on what's important with each other. There'll be plenty of time after the pandemic to assess some of these other questions, but right now people are dying on the streets literally and they need our help.
The last question is from the Fiji Indian community, Harish Vilji. Many in the mainstream media, your party leader, the opposition leader, and the Australian Indian community see the government position as racist. Your comment?
Well, absolutely. No, there is no suggestion of race being made in any decision we've made in this pandemic. When we had to ban flights from China, that had nothing to do with race. It was where the pandemic had started. When we had to shut the border with PNG, they're some of our closest neighbours and one of the countries that protected us in World War II. Had nothing to do with race. And here we've got a first time India has been rated as a high risk country. The first health advice we've received, not a government decision, but health decision. We've had to do something very tough. It's all about protecting the Australian community and also protecting Australians, but also as a great country with a great friendship with India, a great partnership. Our prime ministers are very close. Our communities are very close. Our number one source country for migrants. We've developed close bonds between our countries. And what that means is we're prepared to send whatever we can spare in terms of equipment and help during this pandemic. And I think those suggestions, some of the people now making them, I think it sounds very hollow. I think people know that it's got nothing to do with race. And I think you can rest assured we're going to do as much as we can to help save every life that we can in India. We're thinking about it constantly and we're listening to the Indian government about what they need. And I know people here are organising fundraisers. I'm going to go to as many as possible. We're going to do whatever we can to help.
Thank you, Mr. Hawke, for your time. And thank you. One thing that you're arranging 8 flights in next 3 to 4 weeks is a great thing for Indian standard in India.
Well, sorry, Rajesh, I hate to tell you, but the 8 flights were scheduled, but they've been cancelled. So that's the point where on the 15th, we'll be able to announce what's next. We're hoping to resume as many repatriations as possible. But before this it came on, there was already about 8 flights ready to go and they've been cancelled because of this. But, we're hopeful to work through this in the coming weeks.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
It was good to get. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Australia's first Indian magazine to have a national reach, Indus Age is the largest circulated South Asian magazine in Australia with 5 simultaneous editions, 55,000 copies printed monthly, 220,000 readers, largest network of clients, undisputed leader in community news. Indus Age is circulated in Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, Brisbane and Perth to over 525 outlets. Grab your copy now to get the latest on the community, news from India, Bollywood, music and much more. For more info, log on to www.indusage.com.au.